right, everybody. Welcome to Believe It or Not, our 25th episode of Tools at Tea Time
On Tuesdays,
with.
Tim and Anna.
All right. So,
Woo-hoo.
yes, we're back. And you guys know the stick kind of after coming to this show, but we're basically going to start off with a little moment of like getting ourselves together. This is your first day back to school, unusual because of the holiday. So let's just take a second to get kind of grounded and centered. And Anna, do you mind leading this? If you want to close your eyes, Anna will verbalize it. And then I'm going to make Paige co-host, Anna.
All right. Today we're going to remove the day's stress hormone. So you can close your eyes or you can look at the breathe in, breathe out little GIF. And we're going to do that for just a few minutes. So breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And I think we're good. Are we
All
feeling
right.
less stressed today?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And believe it or not, it removes cortisol, the stress hormone, from your blood. So hopefully that'll help. We're going to do our usual. We're going to start off with this week's theme and a letter from our imaginary fan base. We'll introduce our special guest, and then she'll introduce this week's tool. So our weekly email comes from our imaginary fan base. Anna, do you want to read that for us?
Yes, and today we have a very special imaginary fan coming to us from Resilience Elementary. Dear Tim and Anna, often when I'm teaching my students something new, I find that they share many of the same preconceptions. I never know what those are until we are in the thick of it. Plus, I discover new ones every year. I then have to backtrack to correct these if they are causing confusion. It's even harder for me to uncover these when I'm not in the same room with them. Can you help? Party Pris, third grade teacher, Resilience Elementary.
And that brings us to this week's theme, which is uncovering student ideas at a distance.
Yes.
So we're going to introduce our guest today. Many of you know that today's special guest has worked now for over 40 years on behalf of students and teachers. She started teaching in a classroom in 1981, so happy 40th anniversary, Paige. She's the author of many books, many of which are bestsellers and award winners. Her books are filled with great formative assessments like this one, which are called probes. And so we thought it would be fun today to introduce Paige herself with a probe that we made up about Paige. So our phenomena is this. Author and educator Paige Keeley's Uncovering Student Ideas books are very popular with teachers. What do you think causes these books to be so popular? Damaris, an athlete, thought that it was because of the endorsements she was getting from Nike, while Jerome thought it was because of the most recently announced movie deal with Disney in which Julia Roberts will be playing the role of Paige Keeley. But Wendy, their teacher, disagreed. She said it was because students and teachers alike really like these and that they really work. So which person do you agree with and why? What makes you say that? Go ahead and type it in the chat. No, I'm just joking. Without any further ado, we're going to hand off to Paige Keeley. Paige, thanks for joining us today. We feel fortunate to have you. Do you want me to quit screen sharing?
Oh, no, you're going to share the screen for me. You'll
Yeah.
run the slides? Yeah, sure. Okay, you can quit screen sharing right now. Then we'll pull it up after I tell the story. So you'll notice before we stop the screen, there's a probe called the mitten problem. And I'm going to start off by telling you the story about this probe and what really started my work and how it got me interested in developing these things called formative assessment probes. Now, I'm assuming that some of you know what they are and have used them, but if not, that's okay. After I tell you the story, we'll look at a couple more examples. I'll talk a little bit about how they're used in your classroom. Okay, so you can stop the screen share now, Ted.
Okay, go ahead and start it.
Yeah.
Okay. One
So,
second.
okay, so do I pop up on the screen now?
Yes, we're seeing
Okay,
you.
all right, all right, all right. So you'll notice I have a mitten and a thermometer. And think about what would happen to the temperature reading on this thermometer if I slipped it inside this mitten and left it for a few minutes. Now, if you want to talk about that on the chat, you're welcome to, but I want to tell you the story about this probe. So this all started back in the early 1990, I think it was, when I read an article that was published in the Kappan called Teaching for Conceptual Change, confronting children with their experience. And at the time, I was an 8th grade teacher. I was teaching middle school. And the article was written by Dick Konachek Moran, who is a mentor of mine, and his doctoral student, Bruce Watson. And it was a case study. They were working with a 5th grade teacher in Springfield, Massachusetts, getting her to teach with more of a constructivist approach. She typically started her lessons with vocabulary and worksheets. And remember, this was back in the early 90s. And so the story starts like this. She started off her lesson by just asking her students, what do you know about heat and temperature? And sure enough, they had a lot of ideas. They said, oh, heat comes from the sun, things like stoves heat up. And then it got interesting because some of the children started talking about their clothes giving off heat. And pretty soon there was this conversation about warm clothes like hats and coats and mittens. And so instead of correcting the students, she decided to let them find out themselves if their clothes actually gave off their winter clothes actually gave off the heat. So she got out some thermometers and she had the kids get their hats and their coats and their mittens off the coat rack. And they looked at the thermometers and then they slipped them into their warm clothes. They left them for a few minutes and then they pulled the thermometers out and they saw there really was no difference, but they wouldn't believe it. They said, we have to leave them in there longer. So she let them, put them back in. They left them for 10 minutes or so, pulled them out again, took a look, no significant difference. They still wouldn't believe it. They decided to leave them in for an hour. So they did that. And again, they pulled them out. They saw there wasn't a difference. Then some of the children thought, well, maybe there's something wrong with these thermometers. And it's a great example of how misconception is very, very resistant to change. But they still would not give up this idea that they had to be left in there longer. So they decided to wrap them up in some things they had in the room and leave them overnight, come back to school the next day. And there still was no significant change. They still wouldn't give this up. They said, well, why don't we put them in bags? We'll seal them in bags. We'll put them in our desk. We'll put them in the closet. They did that. They still saw no change because they were starting to think that, well, maybe the cold was getting in somehow. And so if we protect them from the cold, maybe we'll see a big difference and it will go up. But so they did these things. They still saw no change. And then she realized they were stuck. So she had to give them a new theory. So their theory was that these things called warm clothes that give off their own heat just were not seeing that increase in the temperature because somehow the cold was getting in. But then she remembered at the beginning of the lesson, one of the children said something about our bodies giving off heat, that our bodies are warm. And so she said, well, what if it was our bodies that were giving off the heat? And that was her other proposed theory, but they didn't really like that. They really wanted to hold on to this theory that the clothes were giving off the heat, but somehow the cold was getting in. So she asked them how they could test that. And so they came up with this idea that they would go outside. It was February, it was cold, and they would they would put on their warm clothes, and then they would take the thermometers and they would slip them inside their jackets, put them on their heads, put their hats on, slip them inside their mittens. And sure enough, if they were right, because it was so cold out, they wouldn't see a change because the cold would get in there. Well, they went and they did that. And then she pulled them all together. They pulled the thermometers out, but this time they saw they went way up, way up. And the kids were surprised. They went back in, they tried to make sense of that. And to make this long story short, they then realized it was their bodies, that their bodies were warm and that their clothes were trapping the heat. So they essentially came up with this concept of an insulator. And they came up with this idea, which we know about transfer of energy, that we can slow that down. We can slow down that loss of heat by putting on things like hats and coats and mittens that are insulators that trap our body heat and prevent it from moving to the outside colder environment. Eventually it will, but it will slow it down. So that's why they weren't seeing that big increase in the temperature when they started, because they hadn't put them on their bodies yet. So anyway, I thought it was a really interesting article. And I was teaching 8th grade, and these were 5th graders. And I thought, 8th graders probably wouldn't think that. But I decided to ask that same question. And I had a mitten, I had the thermometer. I asked my 8th graders what would happen if I slipped that thermometer into the mitten. And you know what? The whole story unfolded exactly like that 5th grade class. There was no difference. Same thing, they thought they had to be in there longer. Same thing, they thought there was something wrong with the thermometer. Same thing, they thought the cold was somehow getting in there. We did the same thing. They came up with their own idea that it was their body heat and that the mitten was an insulator. It was the best lesson I ever taught. And I was considered to be a really good teacher back then, doing a lot of inquiry. But what I wasn't doing was, I wasn't starting with where the students were, what kinds of ideas they had in their heads. I just launched right into doing investigations. And, you know, all these years, and this was in Maine, I taught in Maine, just, and you know how it's a lot like Colorado. All those years of cold weather, cold winters can really skew their thinking without us even realizing it. And sure enough, that's what happened to my students. So I knew I had to start with that and get them to willingly give up these ideas and to figure it out for themselves, which is really the essence of science today when we work with phenomena. So that's my short story about how this got started. So that mitten probe actually goes all the way back when I was an 8th grade teacher, and I have been writing a lot of these probes ever since. I'm up to over 300 of them now in my books. And I firmly believe that in order for teaching to be successful and for learning to be engaging and exciting, you want to start with where your students are, and you want to use their ideas to build that bridge to get them over to where they will willingly give up their preconceptions and embrace the scientific way of thinking. So these are really powerful tools. They totally transformed me as a teacher. And I hear stories all the time about teachers who've been transformed by using these. So this is the thermometer probe. And well, we can go to the next slide. I'll show you another example, especially if you're not familiar with them. This is my signature format when I usually write these instead of A, B, C, D answer choices. You pick a person you agree with, because this really mirrors what should be going on in your classroom, whether face-to-face or virtually. You should be talking about your ideas and realizing that we all come to our learning with different ways of thinking. And what we have to do is figure out what's the best way of thinking. Who do we most agree with and why? And then figure out why some of these other ideas might not be the best way of thinking. We can go to the next slide. And another signature format I use are these justified lists, which take a concept and you have to choose the things that fit that concept and the things that do not, and explain your thinking, come up with a rule or some kind of reasoning to explain why you chose the items on the list. These work great in a virtual environment too, because you can do this as, I call it the claims card strategy where each student is assigned one of those objects and they have to speak from that object, whether they think it can reflect light or not reflect light, and be able to defend why. And then the class votes on whether they agree or disagree. And you create your chart of the things that can reflect light and the things they think cannot reflect light. But as we know, everything on that list can reflect light. But there's a very strong misconception that just shiny things like mirrors reflect light. So these are really powerful. They can work in a virtual environment. You can use your poll functions to have students select answer choices. And the nice thing about the polls is they are anonymous. So it feels safe to students to put their answer choices out there. And when students look at that poll virtually, it creates this desire to find out when they see that, oh my gosh, not everybody's thinking the same way. We all have different ways of thinking about this. So even seeing that poll is a way to engage the students and create that desire to know and to want to figure it out. You can also use breakout rooms, just like we use the four corners physically in the classroom. When you use probes, you can go to breakout rooms to discuss your answer choices. So there's so many ways you can use these both virtually or in person, but what I want to leave you with is they are transformative. They will change the way you teach. They really engage students because they're about things that are familiar to them. They create a desire to know. And the best thing about them is it's not about getting the right answer. It's about what you think and getting your thinking out there and sharing it with others. So that's my story for you. And if we go to the next slide, like I said, there are a lot of these. This is I call it the never ending book series. They just keep coming out. These are all the books that I currently have. The most recent one is the engineering and technology book. So students have misconceptions about engineering and technology as well, but they cover all the areas of science, and you can learn more about them by going to that link to go to my website, uncoveringstudentideas.org, or you can follow me on Twitter. A lot of teachers who are using my probes post ways that they have been using them on Twitter with lots of great strategies, including virtual strategies. So thank you for inviting me to your tea time tonight. I hope you'll try some of these out. There are lots of free samples on my website. And for those of you who are already familiar with these, feel free to share your experiences with each other on the chat. So I'll pass it back to you now, Tim.
Well, thanks, Paige. And, doing this in such a short time is such a challenge. And thank you. You've done such a beautiful job. And, a couple of things. Caleb, who was on before the episode started today, was talking about how hard it is to get kids to talk, especially in an online environment. And the storytelling element of these that you've created really does kind of open up a window where it's okay to be wrong and just start talking about as if it's someone else's idea. I love that format. And I use these with teachers. Most of these misconceptions, many of us graduated with science degrees, but I find we have these same misconceptions because we did a lot of memorizing during our education. Yeah, so thank you for that. So we want to give you guys a chance to talk, and we're going to move to our community check-in. And Anna, if you want to talk about what the probe is, I will go ahead and get ready to paste that in the prompt and send everybody to breakout groups.
All right. So when you go to your breakout room, think about this. How can probing for preconceptions help both you and your students achieve your learning goals? And how can you do this at a distance?
And I see a couple people with their hands up, and Paige said that she might be able to stick around for a few minutes afterwards. We appreciate that. After the episode, if you have questions for her, and it's a couple hours later for her, so we'll keep it short. Paige, we appreciate it. Okay, we're opening your rooms. Just go ahead and accept the invitation, and I'll copy and paste that into the chat in case you didn't see the prompt. Could group number 3 just stay in here with us? Don't accept if you're in group number 3. Just stay here and have your discussion so we can record it for those who watch later. All right, group number 3 can go ahead. Anybody who's still here in the main room with us can go ahead and start your discussion of that prompt. How can probing for preconceptions help both you and your students? Think about how it helps to achieve your learning goals and how you might be able to do this at a distance. Don't be afraid to wade into the waters.
Unless I can start, I had an
Thanks.
experience teaching an online program. I'm an informal educator, but so I'm not in the classroom, but I teach programs that go to kids' houses or into the classroom. And it was on ecosystems, and this wasn't me giving them a choice about possible explanations, but it was rather having them look at non-living elements in an ecosystem versus living elements. And so one little girl said, and there's different pictures, one little girl said, the sun is a living element in an ecosystem. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Can you explain a little more about that? And she said, the sun moves, so it must be living. I would never have thought that in a million years. I think I've encountered kids thinking soil is living because there's living things in them, thinking plants are dead because they don't move. I have not encountered, and water moves. A lot of kids think water's living. So that was
Great example, Kirsten, of, things that are in their heads that we just don't know until you use a probe or something like this to elicit their thinking. Yeah. Yeah. Others here have similar experiences or found some tricks for uncovering these?
So I think I've told some of you I've been here with before. I'm teaching all day, every day in the building, but I also have half my kids at home on Zoom. So I'm been doing this for a while now. And we do a lot of cold calls, and it's such a part of the culture that it's not weird for them. They're not embarrassed. And so we can just kind of be like, hey, Sally, what do you think about this? And then you can say, well, Sally, what do you have to say to add to what Sally said? Or do you agree with her? I also do, because our kids are required to have their camera like available to them. So I'll ask them to do a thumbs up or thumbs down. Like, what do you guys think? Who agrees with? And it's just, again, if you make it a part of the culture, it's not like, oh, I put my thumb down, so I'm like putting Sally down in some way. It's just a big discussion.
Yeah, and Tabby, I was just thinking if some kids are with you and some are, out remotely, it'd be interesting to have like the kids in the classroom have to pick someone's thoughts in the chat. Who do they agree? Type in the chat who you agree with, and somebody in the classroom has to say, well, so-and-so who's on the chat said this, and I kind of think they're right, or I kind of don't agree with them. And it'd be a good way to kind of bring the people that are in the classroom and the people that are out of the classroom together into the same space by asking them to respond to what they see in the chat.
We don't have chat because the kids in the desk in my room don't have their computers out because I don't want them on Discord and Google Hangouts.
Yeah.
But they talk to each other. They can hear, the kids at home can hear the kids in my room, and the kids in my room can hear the kids, and they're projected like huge on the wall, and they just interact.
Yeah,
so they
very cool.
do respond to each other. So anyway, I was just
No.
so to do it at a distance, I think just to we can ask them like, what do you think and who agrees, and just like a discussion kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if Marie has anything to add. I just hit the return button for everybody to come back. So in about 60 seconds, you'll see everybody coming back into the main group. Yeah, I've used that. They have one about models. What is a model? And since most of us have not have not done scientific research, those of us that are teachers, I'm always amazed at what a great discussion I get going with teachers about whether something is a model or not. It's kind of like the checklist version that Paige was talking about. But teachers get really engaged in the conversation, and it helps bring a lot of clarity about how scientists use models. A lot of our everyday ideas about models aren't in fact the way scientists use models. So looks like we got the group coming back, and we appreciate them rejoining us. Thanks Tabby and Kirsten on group number 3 for jumping in, so the people who view this later can see what people, hear some of the conversation. I appreciate you doing that. And I think we're going to move into our closing segment. It looks like everybody's back with us, Anna.
Right.
Almost.
Well, welcome back, everyone. It looks like we've reached the end, my friends. Next week, join us. We're going to learn some cool ways to communicate with parents and a very cool tool that Barb Haggerty from Pennock Elementary is going to share with us.
Yeah, as Anna said, we appreciate you joining us this week, and we appreciate Paige coming. Please tell your friends to join us and let us know what ideas for topics you are interested in future weeks. Paige has dropped some great resources into the resource folder. You can see the tiny URL here, and Ugo will be sending that out in the next couple days if you want to check out some of her probes and an article that she wrote. And the recording of this will be up on our website in a couple days. You can go back and watch it or tell others that you think might be interested. We start a workshop on Saturday for teachers at the museum about best practices in remote teaching. They, of course, apply to hybrid, which a lot of you are doing. And there'll be 2 Saturdays. We hope we'll see some of you sign up for that. Next Monday night is Educators Night. We usually wine and dine you at the museum and let you walk around. And we're not giving up because you guys aren't giving up. So we're going to have a virtual ed night. And from the comfort of your own home, we got an evening of fun and relaxation and laughs that only teachers can appreciate, done all because we appreciate you. And of course, any guests in your home are welcome to join you. Our syllabus for fun for that evening is going to start with a play along with us cocktail mocktail, whipped up by our food and beverage director. Then we're going to have some curators come and tell us some really interesting behind the scenes stuff. And then we'll end the evening by relaxing with an art sip and sketch focused on Jupiter's moon Europa. So otherwise, good to see you.
The thing about that is you get an extra day with Tim. Monday
if you want to do
Tuesday.
penance, join us Monday and Tuesday. Yeah. Yeah. So, and Paige said that she's going to stick around here if people have some questions. We appreciate you, and let us know your thoughts and how we can support you.